Hello everyone, this is that damn Pipsqueak, and I'm bringing you not some MSEM coverage, but a MSEM Deck Tech Magic Fundamentals hybrid video. Um, so I'm going to quickly explain the concept, but also just for the video jankiness, I'm still getting this video setup working. So one thing that is very, very true in MSEM is that being good at sideboard helps you so much. Sideboarding is one of the hardest mechanical parts of Magic the Gathering, and in MSEM, because you get to see other people's GP deck list before you submit your sideboard, you have plenty of ability to create the perfectly tuned sideboard. Um, and it can be really intimidating building a sideboard. You need to know what to add, you need to know how to beat the metagame, you need to know what numbers. It's really stressful. A lot of people kind of just eyeball it and say, whatever, let's throw in 3 copies of these 5 effects that I want and call it a day. But I'm going to explain the slightly more rigorous process I go through. And to do that, since I don't want to give away secrets for the current GP, I'm going to be using a deck that I 5-0'd a league with, which is Black-White Villainy. And explain the process of building the original sideboard for the deck, and then use Grand Prix Irkutsk to build a new sideboard. So, buckle in. Basic gist of this deck is it's a deck that uses the titular card Villainy, and a bunch of cheap black spells in order to drain your opponent out after you control the board. You also have Intrepid for slightly more threat density, as well as Xanagan and Descend Upon the Helpless for threats. The deck's kind of main gimmick is using no rest to recur villainies. So looking at the deck, there's a lot of 4X's, but there's actually a couple numbers here that are notable. So I'm running 3 Exeunt and 2 Descend Upon the Helpless. Both these occupy the same slot of 1 mana, cheap interaction, specifically versus aggro. Which means against aggro decks, I want these. Against decks without creatures, I don't. So in the back of my head, I'm already keeping in mind, versus some amount of decks, I have 5 outs. I need to take out 3 Villainy, 2 Descend Upon the Helpless, and I also need to actually take out the Vibrant Raptures. So I have 7, I have 7 cards I want to cut versus near creatureless decks, versus control decks. Versus decks that are mostly creature-based, I want to cut these Duresses. I also want to trim on some of the 8 card draw spells I have, since those cause me to lose life, versus aggro decks. So versus aggro decks, I probably have room for somewhere on the order of 4 to 6. 24 lands means that if I'm on the draw, I can sometimes afford to cut 1 land. That land is pretty much always going to be Mirrorgate, assuming I'm in a matchup where Mirrorgate isn't super useful. If I'm in a really fast matchup, and they have utility lands, probably cut Nareva. So those are kind of the things that you should be thinking through. Think of why the various cards in your decks are there, what matchups you're innately hedging. So this deck is, as you see, built more to beat aggro. It has a lot more cards that it cuts against non-aggro decks. So going into the sideboard, let's see what we have. I finish off the Violent Raptures and also bring in Antithesis. So those are 3 cards that are good against aggro. I also can bring in 2 Memento Moris, which are doing flex hitting as both cheap removal that synergizes well with the board wipes I'm bringing in, while also being graveyard hate. Finding those types of cards that are good in multiple different matchups is super helpful. So we're looking at 3, 4, 5 cards that we bring in versus aggro, and potentially bringing Anguished on making, maybe, if it's like a sufficiently big aggro deck that just has creatures I must kill at all costs that my other interaction won't hit. I don't like bringing this in against aggro because lose 3 life kind of sucks. And I also can bring in Explorer's Fates, because one of the ways you lose to aggro is you have a slow clock. Versus control decks, remember I'm boarding out 2 Descend Upon the Helpless, 2 Vibrant Rapture, and 3 Exeunt. And I'm boarding in 4 Prying Inquiries, 2 Explorer's Fate, and then either a Anguished on Making, assuming they are winning via enchantments slash artifacts slash planeswalkers, or I'm bringing in a cheeky Seal the Tomb. That way, if I nab 1 win con, I can just say, cool, you never have another copy of that win con. Versus combo, again, probably cutting the Exeunts, Vibrant Raptures, Descend Upon the Helpless. But against combo, instead of bringing in 3 Seal the Tombs, 4 Prying Inquiry. Those are just the kind of snap-ins. Sometimes I'll be bringing in Memento Moris, in which case I'm probably cutting some land slots. Or maybe in those matchups, I don't need to be bringing in all of the Prying Inquiries. Maybe it's a combo deck that empties its hand really fast. So, the main thing you want to be thinking about when you build your main deck is what cards are your flex spots. What One of the things that's a really common mistake while sideboarding is people will over sideboard because they will take their deck that is already this efficient, tuned, linear machine and they'll just add a bunch of cards that are generically good against your opponent. And you really don't want to do that. If you're a linear deck, you want to be minimizing how much you sideboard. Only sideboard if it's necessary for you to win. Like, let's say they have a enchantment you cannot beat them through, like Guiding Light, maybe board in enchantment removal. Or if you boarding in that spell will win you that game. So let's say you're playing against a Reanimator deck that you know won't have much in the way of graveyard or of enchantment removal, and you board in a Sigil of Radiance, and just it's game over. So the kind of logic behind sideboarding is there's that type that I described of the kind of one-shot knockout, and then there's also just subtle hedges. So again, my main deck is generally pretty good. I have very few cards that are going to be totally dead. And the cards that are going to be dead, I replace them with cards that are a little bit more specific than I would want in a main deck. Like, Prying Inquiry is entirely fine in the main deck, but it's a little clunky, so I don't want it. But basically all of these cards, maybe with the exception of, like, Explorer's Fate, or sorry, of the exception of Seal the Tomb, all these are cards that you can kind of imagine in a main deck. And so what I'm doing here is also known as the elephant method, where you view your 75 cards as a cohesive deck, and you're just trying to find which 60 are best for what given matchup. So you can bring in haymakers, you can make little tweaks necessary to hedge your deck, you can cut bad cards to bring in slightly less bad cards. Those are kind of the general approaches to sideboarding. There's also transformative sideboards, but I haven't built one of those in MSEM yet, so I don't want to get into that. So let's move on to the kind of the case study of the day. So Grand Prix Irkutsk contained the following decks: Augur's Chaotic Evil, which is a red-black villainy deck, kind of mid-range tempo-ish, featuring some cheap creatures that are very dangerous, some grindy planeswalkers, and villainy. Blues Eclipse was playing Temur tokens, so go wide with Union Rail Strikebreaker, Splitting Bloom, Untethered Disciple, have a bit of burn in the form of Frogar's Frenzy and Void Flare. Intrepid is also there. Egg was on Rug Roll, which is a pretty outright linear, just ramp into scary big things deck, with Sights Beyond as a card advantage engine. CFT Sock was on a 5-color combo abomination. If you can't tell how it kills, that's kind of reasonable. It involves these Fire Shaper Adepts plus Kincan. Chumba was on Suicide Black, so just mono black, fairly aggressively slanted, but not actually that many threats. Fair bit of removal, lots of card draw, lots of discard. Cyber was on a 140 card aggro deck that was a red-green aggro deck featuring Dream Sightwell, which is this card. Fifth was also on a red-black villainy variant, but this one was a little bit more creature-focused. Gateways was blue-red wizards. Hersey was Road to Awe, which is a graveyard combo deck. David's was a, I think this is Bug Desert Ramp deck. Main win cons are these Planeswalker Suite, as well as Ultimate Emissary. Caillou was a all-in turn 2 combo deck using Clockwork Spellwork. And I was playing 5-color control, but we're going to assume I'm not there. So the immediate thing that should come to mind here is there's basically two speeds of decks. There's hyperlinear decks that are all killing through creatures. Every single one of the linear decks is killing through creatures, which is very good for a deck like this. And then there's the slow, more controlling mid-range decks that are packing a lot of interaction. And most of that interaction is actually coming in the form of discard. So 7 discard spells from Augur, another 8 from Chumbeck, another 8 from 5th. No, 4 from 5th. So you get the, or 7, I guess, with a Guri. So let's quickly reset the sideboard. So again, my approach when I'm building these fair deck sideboards is I look at my main deck and I think, what are the cards in this deck that I think, wow, I really wish I had brought another copy of that to this GP. So versus a lot of these linear decks, a bunch of them are go wide aggro decks. So versus those, I would definitely want the 2 Vibrant Raptures I just cut. After that, it's kind of a decision. I could either throw in another board wipe of some sort. I could actually fill out the 4th copy of Exeunt, because Exeunt is very good against Caillou's deck, since Caillou's deck on your end step fetches out an Arboreal Ruins, and then attempts to enchant it with Clockwork Spellwork. So if we had a Exeunt, we could just kill it. We also have Pithwilt already to kill it, though. So we have about 7 ways of answering it. But let's say we're on the draw. If we're on the draw, Exeunt's going to be the only way we have to answer that. So let's just, for now, throw in Exeunt as just a, I guess we may as well. So versus Hersey's deck, Road to Awe, this deck is a combo deck that is going to try to get Clawing Shaman into the graveyard and reanimate it, or get a Lion's Vanguard into the graveyard and reanimate it. It also has kind of a fair plan with Unearthed Legion and some of these grindier cards. But the main thing you'll notice about this is we're really well set up to deal with its kind of fair plan. We have a lot of creature removal, and we can probably grind it out. So the thing that we need to stop is we need to avoid dying to the combo plan. So if we're avoiding dying to the combo plan, Memento Mori is the way to go. It exiles all cards from target player's graveyard, and also if we board it in and Hersey tries to pull one over us and transform into a more fair deck, it's still an edict. It's still a passable effect. In other decks, we might want something like Coldgrave, but in this deck where we absolutely want as much black non-creature spells as we can get, I'm going to toss 2 Memento Mori in here. The other kind of more... Let's see, what were the other kind of more combo-y decks? So the other kind of combo-y deck is this ramp deck, where its threats are Seismic Colossus, backed up by some Mana Dorks, which means our Exeunts aren't going to be that good, our Pithwilts aren't going to be that good. So actually the Seismic Colossus should really scare us. It has Alexa, who's not actually that good. It has Sights Beyond and Intrepid as kind of over the time. Sights Beyond is basically don't let it stick a planeswalker or creature long enough. And our answer to Intrepid is our own Intrepid / try to made it. But it's definitely a little dicey, and this rock roll should versus that rock roll is we want a sweeper that explicitly hurts rock roll. And if we're bringing Flesh Draw, this also helps our matchup versus aggro decks a lot. Like, Blues' deck really struggles versus a rock roll. X deck does, as we described. CFT Sock's deck, like, basically can't beat a rock roll. Its best case scenario is Leha's Greenblade, or cheating out a Moroni Survivalist. But again, if someone only has 1 creature, we're in a really good spot. Oh, also, Demolition Divisor is very bad versus Flesh Drop, which is also a slight upside. So we're going to go up to... I think for here, because Flesh Draw is so good against so many of these decks, and we want to see it, and we need to see it fairly fast because it's a 4-drop, we're going to go up to 3 Flesh Rots, and we're going to go and cut one of these Vibrant Raptures. Where Vibrant Rapture is better than Flesh Rot is versus Blues deck, but pretty much none of the other ones. So, and I guess also Blue-Red Wizards to some extent. So, a little bit sad, but still probably for the best. So we're up to 7 cards in our sideboard. Decks we feel relatively comfortable against. We feel fairly comfortable against this deck. Well, no, we only have 1... actually, we're also boarding in the Memento Moris. So we're boarding in 3 cards versus that deck. We're boarding out probably just the Descend Upon the Helpless. So that's 2 cards we're boarding out. And maybe we cut... want to cut 2 Vibrant Raptures as well. So 2 and 2 are the cuts. So we want, another 1 card to board in. So maybe this is where we grab a Seal of Tomb.
We could also bring in an Anguished Unmaking, but I think that's a little bit slow versus this deck. Seal the Tomb is only good if it fails to go off once, and then we can seal the tomb either the Clockwork Spellbook or the Arboreal Runes. Both those I don't love. Um, if there were more decks using artifacts here, I would be in favor of bringing Arcane Chronometer. But this deck is just kind of a little bit weird. Like, most of the cards we have versus it would be pretty narrow. And we don't really want to do narrow cards. We could bring in another threat to try to kill it a little bit faster. I think what I'm going to advocate for is just uptick these Memento Moris by 1. And so we're going to be bringing in 1 Exeunt, 3 Memento Moris, swapping out the Descend Upon the Helpless Vibrant Rapture. Now, this might go poorly. It's possible that Caillou is going to board into, well, it doesn't look like he did it this GP, but it's possible he's going to want to board into a more fair deck, because one thing that combo decks sometimes do is they post-board sidestep the interaction they expect to hit. Caillou expects to get hit by a bunch of Edicts, and instead they bring in something like Union Strikebreaker. And then we're like, oh wow, I really wish we had Sweepers instead of Edicts. But we do have some insulation versus Union Strikebreaker via Pithwilt, via Villainy, so we're not too worried about that anyway. So we're insulated against Kai. We have an easy in and out plan. Crow. Crow is doing a lot of Planeswalker stuff, and a fair bit of interaction. This is a little bit scary for us. We want to cut. I think our best bet is to cut the Exeunts instead of the Descend Upon the... No. Cut the Descend Upon the Helpless, because sorcery speed is bad. Cut Vibrant Rapture, so that's -4 cards. Maybe trim an Exeunt if we have something better, so that's around 5 cards. And then we need things that are really good against those Planeswalkers. Helene and Xanagan. So what I would probably do in this circumstance is grab, let's say, let's say we're going to grab 2 Just Business. So against this deck, we're bringing in currently just 2 Just Business, and we're boarding out 2 4 cards. See, that's not looking great. We need more for this matchup. We could just keep stacking Just Business. I'm not a huge fan of that, though, because it's pretty narrow. Instead, the angle we should probably attack on is bring in more hand attack. Because these threats are kind of slow and need to stick around in hand. I'm a little bit worried to get into hand attack war against someone else who's bringing hand attack, but I think that's probably the best bet. And just hope to clock the deck out relatively fast with Villainies. So let's also throw in 2 Prying Inquiries into our sideboard. And actually, Prying Inquiry is now shoring up the match versus Caillou as well. So we could alternatively bring in Prying Inquiry, Exeunt, and just 1 Memento Mori. Or we can cut some of the other cards that we were feeling a little bit iffy on, and add in, like, we could swap one of the lands, like Mirrorgate, for Prying Inquiry. That sort of thing. We could trim I don't think we want to trim threats, but maybe we would want to trim a No Rest, because that's kind of slow in this matchup. So versus Hersey. Versus Hersey, our main deck's actually good. It's less good versus the combo approach, but versus the fair game plan, we're kind of in a good spot. Also, technically, I believe... Yeah, so technically, we can actually Exeunt Clawing Shaman in response to the ETB. We can only do this if the deck... If Hersey doesn't have any creatures, which is kind of unlikely. But that's technically a line. So versus this deck, what we're going to do is we're going to be boarding out... Vibrant Rapture is pretty bad against this deck. It's not fast enough as far as sweepers go. Descend Upon the Helpless is fine, but not good. I would probably board out a Mirrorgate, the Vibrant Rapture, so that's -3 cards, and probably trim at least 2 No Rests. It's a little too dirty for what this matchup's about. So we're looking at -5-ish cards, and we're bringing in 3 Memento Moris, because those are great, and 3 flesh Tarot. So probably trim another no rest. So yeah, I think we're good about that matchup too. Gateways. This is like the quintessential aggro deck. So we're going to be boarding out Duresses and trimming on our card draw. So that's -6, let's say. And we're boarding in 3 Flesh to Rot, another Exeunt, a Vibrant Rapture, and a Memento Mori. Great. Fifth deck. So this deck actually gets a little bit wonky, because this deck has 4 Planeswalkers we're kind of scared of, a lot of creatures that are 2-for-1s, and Villainy. Now, we can probably win a Villainy war because we have Pithwilts, and the Villainy deck with Pithwilt is going to be the Villainy deck without Pithwilt. But the other angle to attack this deck on is, if you look at these creatures, these are all ETBs. So, what do we do versus ETBs? We get really rude and bring in a card specifically to hose ETBs. Notably, we could even board this against Road to Awe, because this shuts down basically the entire deck. So let's just chuck a couple of those in the sideboard. I'd probably also bring in Prying Inquiries, so I'd look at +4 cards, maybe bring in the Exeunt, just have more interaction, maybe the Flesh to Rot, boarding out probably the Duresses. It does have a bunch of non-creatures we're scared of, but really Duresses are going to feel bad when we're playing against someone else with Duress, and with this many creatures we can't hit. So instead we want to switch to a more Prying Inquiry-based approach. We're probably not going to be Vibrant Rapturing in this matchup. It's fine. It's not great. So we're looking at somewhere on the order of -6. We're going +2, +2, maybe +2. It's a little bit, maybe board in the Just Business, or a Just Business, so we have a game against those legends. Cybers is the same thing as Gateways. It's just another creature-based aggro deck. So we board out the Duresses, we board out the things that deal us damage, we board in some board wipes. Chumbacue, so this deck is kind of weird, but I think you actually just want to treat it as a aggro deck that has only a few creature win cons. So our plan in this matchup is all Doomblades on deck. We're going to board out the Duresses, we don't care about Duresses, and we're just bring in 3 Memento Moris and an Exeunt. Probably just those. We might have room for another card against this matchup if we feel a little bit uncertain. CFT Sock. We want the Flesh Tarots, we want the Exeunt, we want the Vibrant Rapture. We treat this as a creature deck and we just wipe its board and kill all of its creatures. Eggs we talked about, we want those 3 Flesh Tarots. We're keeping the Duresses because this deck, all the scary stuff other than Seismic Colossus is all non-creature. We board in some Prying Inquiries. So we're boarding in 5-ish cards. And I think I would board out the Descend Upon the Helpless and probably Pithwilt. Pithwilt doesn't hit that much in this deck, other than Intrepid. I guess Intrepid's a reason to keep it. Maybe board out Vibrant Rapture, because X equals... Well, we should be able to cast X equals 5 by the time we're fighting Rockroll. It's hard to say. And we want to grind, but maybe the line is cut the Mirror Gate, cut 2 Descend Upon the Helpless, because it's not that good in this matchup. It's fine, it's not good. And maybe, I don't know, maybe trim on No Rest, and then board in 3 Flesh to Rot and 2 Prying Inquiry. And Blues Eclipse, we talked about this. Just bring in a bunch of board wipes, call it a day. Versus Augur's deck, this deck is kind of a more mid-rangey version of Fifth's deck. So fewer creatures, so we can't, and our Chains of Subdual really are not that good in this matchup. So maybe the solution versus this deck, since it's a lot more kind of interactive and slow, maybe we should bring in our own threat? That feels a little bit dubious. At this stage, I'd probably throw in a Fun Of, or just a card that's a little bit better. Let's go and say the final Descend Upon the Helpless, or 4th Descend Upon the Helpless. So this is a 15-card sideboard. This video was a little bit sloppier than I liked, but I hope it showed you kind of the process I go through of identifying what cards in your deck are bad versus a matchup, and what cards you need to board out, and what cards you want in those slots, and try to figure out more general cards, and just go through all your matchups and make sure you have cards you want for those matchups, and make sure you're not boarding in too many cards. Make sure you aren't way over prepared for aggro because you were really scared of it, and also make sure you're not underprepared. If you have 5 cards to cut and 3 cards to bring in, you're going to have to leave 2 cards that are bad in that matchup. This is how you do it for interactive decks. Linear decks, it's a little bit different. There, you really need to be thinking of what is the most damage I can do with the fewest number of sideboard slots, and otherwise, just, figure out what you're hedging in your main deck. If your deck is currently not built to fight control, like none of your creatures 2-for-1, bring in a draw engine in the board. If your deck has no ability to clock combo,
Disrupt it, bring in a cheap piece of combo disruption. That way you can play it while you're still attacking them or linearing them. And the same goes for versus other aggro decks. Figure out whether you're going to go under or over those decks, and either bring in board wipes if you're going to go over, or bring in, I don't know, figure out what your slow cards are and bring in faster cards if you're going to go under them. Like, cut your top end and instead bring in duress. I hope this video at least gives people a little bit more guidance on how to sideboard in this format and how to sideboard in general. I hope you all enjoyed. I had a very good time doing it, and if people are interested in more content like this in the future, please let me know.